You know, it's not every day that you come across a wine like this, but I am so glad that I did. And I'm even more glad that I came across it in a way that allowed me to include it in this wine club shipment. Because this is a wine that will make you question whether or not you've actually ever had white wine before. This is a white wine like you've never had. And I'm so excited to be able to share it with you. This is the 2019 CVNE Monopole. This is a white wine coming from Rioja. Yes, a white wine coming from Rioja. In fact, we've got two wines coming from Rioja in this shipment. It's all things Spain, or at least for half of it. We're half California, half Spain. And this is a wine that I think a lot of you will maybe be familiar with in terms of producer, but maybe not so much in terms of this actual bottling, which has an enormous amount of historic relevance and significance. So let's talk about this wine and what it means, how we got it, what's in your glass, more importantly. Right. So many of you will know that the primary red grape of Rioja in Spain is going to be Tempranillo. But what you maybe don't know is that the primary white grape is this grape right here. This is 100% or close to it. Viura, also known as Macabeo, for those of you who like to geek out, and a grape that you will find in your cavas in Spain. You'll notice that it's got a really, really golden hue already, even though this is definitely on the younger side. And we'll talk about why that is in just a second. But I want you to notice immediately when you smell this wine that there's something super nutty about it. Do you get that? It's very almondy. There's like a frangipane thing. And it almost smells a little like sherry, if you've ever had sherry, right? That Manzanilla sherry, it's kind of salty. It's like roasted, salted almonds. It's got that oiliness to it. It's super, super alluring. That should be the very, very first thing that you smell on this wine. And there's a reason for that. The Vero grape is always going to give you sort of this, what we would call oxidative quality. It has these notes that are very much in the nut family. There's a little floral under there as well. There's a little apple. There's definitely some fruit. But this grape really likes to be on the oxidative side. The other really interesting thing about this, and we'll talk about how it's made in one second, is that there is a touch of Manzanilla sherry in the actual wine. So basically, right before they're finishing, they add a little bit of Manzanilla sherry. And so that does account for a little bit of those sherry qualities. So if you're getting that, not to worry, that is exactly how it's supposed to smell. No, if this nose is something that's completely new to you, I'm super excited because this is one of those wines, as I sort of alluded to, that makes you question whether or not you've ever had white wine. It's something that we don't expect in white wine. We expect more of these fruity flavors in the orchard camp, like if it's Chardonnay, in the tropical camp, like if it's Sauvignon Blanc, and then sometimes on these like minerally zesty lemon side, if it's something like Pinot Grigio. But very rarely do you have a white wine that gives you something like this. Raise your hand if you like this wine. Yeah, me too. Let's talk about it on the palate. Okay. Do you feel in that first sip how much you're salivating? There is an enormous amount of acidity, but what should be different for you and what you should be feeling is this really gentle roundness, right? Unlike something like a Pinot Grigio or a Sauvignon Blanc that's done in stainless steel, where it kind of gives you that zigzaggy feeling in your mouth, there's actually a really great creaminess to it. Not creamy in the way that we find with Chardonnay, it doesn't give you that buttery feeling, and it definitely doesn't give you that oakiness, but there is a roundness to this wine that you should notice that's sort of counterbalanced by the acidity. The flavors of this wine, you should still be getting all of that great nuttiness, but continue to notice the saltiness, and you'll start to feel the fruits come in a little bit more. For me, this definitely leans in the apple camp. So I'm getting a little bit of a mixture of green apple, a little bit of that Granny Smith, and then Gala apple as well. I think when we're talking about Rioja, we're talking about a warmer region. And that's going to be important when we get into this episode because we're actually talking about harvest and vintage notes, these tasting notes that come out when the wines come out. How do you decipher those? What does that mean? What does a hot vintage mean? What does a cold vintage mean? What does a rainy vintage mean? And that all lends itself to how the wine is actually going to taste. So that episode is going to cover all of those things that we see in tasting notes that maybe we don't necessarily attribute to how the wine is tasting. Now, I mentioned this wine has some serious historic significance and is a fairly famous producer in Spain. In fact, if you were to ask someone that loves Spanish wine who some of their favorite producers are, I would venture to say that Cune is going to be one of them. Now, this wine in particular, the Monopole, only started being produced again in 2015. It took a really, really long hiatus after it was super popular from the 1920s until the 1970s. They decided to stop making it. It was a wine that sort of fell out of fashion. Spain didn't really know what to do with it. The American palate was changing, the European palate was changing, and so they just stopped making it. But what's really interesting is that this wine was revived in 2015. They were able to bring back one of the original winemakers who actually made this wine from the 1940s to the 1970s to come back and basically give them the recipe. How did they actually make this wine? And he was actually able to do that until 2017 when he passed away. And now we have a really, really historic wine in our glass. So, what's so special about this wine? How was it actually made? Well, they started, of course, by gently pressing the grapes, a really, really soft extraction. When you hear soft extraction, that should signal to you something to the effect of they want to prevent any sort of bitterness. They don't want a lot of that phenolic involvement that you're going to get from the skins. All they want is that really nice, clean juice, and they want to separate it from the skins as nicely and smoothly as possible. So when you hear gentle pressing, that's what that means. They're trying to avoid any sort of bitterness or phenolic interruption. From there, they're actually taking the wine and they're clarifying it in concrete. So they're giving it a second. They're giving the juice a second to clarify in concrete, which is really interesting. You don't see this very often. And then they're going to put that juice into a stainless steel tank to actually ferment. So a 3-step process before we're even turning this into wine. Really, really interesting. From there, it's going to go for 8 whole months into oak botas, which is basically going to give it enough to be round, but not enough to start to impart a lot of flavor and a lot of tannin. So a lot of that roundness you're really getting from the 8 months that it's sitting in the oak. So you're getting concrete, then you're getting stainless, and then you're getting oak. So 3 vessels. And then from there, as I hinted to already, it is getting a little bit of Manzanilla sherry at the very finished to sort of top everything up. I honestly think this is one of the coolest wines I've ever smelled and tasted. And as we're considering moving into these wintry months, these cooler months, I'm thinking about more textured whites, whites that have something that isn't so fruity, that reminds me of these more seasonal pairings. So, a lot of us are leaning into nut flavors, into fall flavors, root vegetables are coming into season, pumpkin is coming to season. This wine is like gourd season all day. So when you're thinking about what to pair with it, you should definitely be in the root vegetable camp. Anything from potatoes to turnips, beets, what else? Basically anything that you put on your Thanksgiving Day table is what's appropriate with this wine. Definitely lean into proteins with this. You're totally fine, especially given that acidity and because you have that great texture. So light proteins, fish, pork, chicken, all gonna be great. Turkey, since I just mentioned Thanksgiving. Of course, for me, I'm always thinking about the cheese, right? We want to know what goes with cheese. This is a great wine to go with cheese. This is a great pre-dinner party, post-dinner party wine to enjoy, especially if you're going to be going with something that's along the lines of a Spanish cheese. So manchegos are going to be great with something like this. I love a harder cheese with a wine like this. So definitely lean into like the saltier, nuttier cheeses, and then don't forget to throw some almonds on your tray as well. That's going to really, really bring out some of those more almondy flavors of this wine. Oh, I could sit all day with this wine, but alas, we have a few other ones to get to. So I'll see you in the next video.